The first thing my sister said when she saw my dress was, "Cheap girls wear cheap clothes." She said it with a smile. That was what hurt the most. Not the words themselves. Not even the laughter that followed. It was the way she looked at me afterward, waiting for me to feel embarrassed. And for a few seconds, I did. I stood in the doorway of my parents' dining room wearing a simple navy blue dress that had cost me $47. My sister, Claire, was surrounded by expensive flowers, champagne glasses, designer gift bags, and women wearing dresses that cost more than my monthly rent. It was her bridal shower. And I had been invited because I was her sister. At least, that was what I thought. I didn't know that by the end of the afternoon, my family would regret every word they had said to me. And I certainly didn't know that a famous fashion designer sitting quietly in the corner would eventually stand up and change everything. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 29 years old, and I've never been the kind of woman who cared about designer labels. Not because I hated beautiful clothes. I loved beautiful clothes. I just couldn't justify spending thousands of dollars on something I could buy for less than $100. I worked as a junior interior designer at a small firm in Chicago. My apartment was tiny. My car was 8 years old. And I had spent the last 3 years paying off my student loans. Every dollar I earned had a purpose. So when my younger sister Claire announced her engagement to Daniel, I was genuinely happy for her. Claire had always been different from me. She loved luxury. She loved expensive restaurants, expensive vacations, expensive handbags, and expensive clothes. Growing up, she was the beautiful one. The popular one. The girl everyone noticed when she entered a room. I was the quiet one. The practical one. The girl who stayed home and studied while Claire went to parties. Our parents constantly compared us. Why can't you dress more like Claire? Why can't you be more confident like Claire? Look at your sister. She knows how to present herself. I learned early that being compared to Claire meant I was expected to lose. But I stopped fighting it. I became comfortable with who I was. So when Claire asked me to attend her bridal shower, I wanted to make an effort. I went shopping 2 weeks before the event. I tried on dresses at several boutiques. Some were beautiful. Some were completely out of my budget. Then I found the navy blue dress. It was simple. Elegant. The fabric fell perfectly around my waist, and the sleeves had delicate lace detailing. The price tag said $47. I looked at myself in the mirror and smiled. For once, I didn't care what anyone thought. I bought it. I paired it with my grandmother's pearl necklace. The necklace was the only expensive piece I owned. It wasn't valuable because of its price. It was valuable because my grandmother had given it to me before she died. She used to tell me, "Never confuse expensive with beautiful, Emily." I remembered those words as I got dressed for Claire's bridal shower. I had no idea how important they would become that afternoon. My parents' house looked completely different when I arrived. White roses covered the front entrance. A huge floral arrangement sat on the dining table. There were gold-colored decorations hanging from the ceiling. A champagne bar had been set up in the living room. And parked outside were at least 15 luxury cars. I took a deep breath before walking inside. The moment I entered, I heard laughter. Then Claire saw me. She was standing beside her fiancé, Daniel. She wore a cream-colored designer dress that probably cost more than my car. Her eyes traveled from my face to my shoes. Then to my dress. She paused. And smiled. Oh. One word. But somehow it made me uncomfortable. I walked toward her. "Hi, Claire." She looked at my dress again. "That's what you're wearing?" I smiled politely. "Yeah. Do you like it?" She laughed. Not loudly. Just enough for the women standing around her to notice. "It's cute." One of her friends looked at me. Another covered her mouth. I immediately knew what was happening. Claire tilted her head. Then she said, "Cheap girls wear cheap clothes." The room went quiet for half a second. Then one of her friends laughed. Another woman smiled awkwardly. I felt my cheeks getting hot. I looked down at my dress. Suddenly, the $47 price tag felt like it was printed across my forehead. Claire wasn't finished. She turned toward our mother. "Mom, doesn't Emily look like she's going to a discount store opening?" Mom looked me up and down. Then she laughed. "She does look a little inexpensive." More laughter. I forced myself to smile. "It's just a dress." Claire shrugged. "Exactly." I tried to move toward the kitchen. "Boo." Then Dad spoke. He was sitting in his usual chair, holding a glass of whiskey. He looked at me. Then at Claire. Then back at me. And said, "Why did you even show up?" Everything stopped. I stared at him. "What?" Dad shrugged. "You clearly don't fit in here today." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "This is Claire's bridal shower," I said quietly. "She's my sister." Dad took another sip. "I know." Then he looked at my dress. "That's why I'm surprised you came dressed like that." I felt something break inside me. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. Something I had spent years protecting finally cracked. I looked around the room. Nobody defended me. Not my mother. Not my sister. Not even the women who had known me since childhood. Everyone was watching. Waiting. Maybe they expected me to cry. Maybe they expected me to leave. Instead, I smiled. And said, "You're right." Claire looked surprised. "What?" I nodded. "You're right. I don't belong here." Then I turned around. And walked toward the door. I was almost outside when I heard a voice behind me. "Excuse me." I stopped. I turned around. A woman was standing near the fireplace. I hadn't noticed her before. She was probably in her late 50s. She wore a simple black suit. No flashy jewelry. No obvious designer handbag. Nothing about her screamed wealth. She had been sitting quietly throughout the entire conversation. Claire looked at her. "Margaret?" The woman nodded. "Yes." Claire smiled nervously. "Are you okay?" Margaret didn't answer her. Instead, she walked toward me. She looked at my dress. Then she looked at my grandmother's pearls. And finally, she looked directly into my eyes. "Where did you get that dress?" I hesitated. "A small boutique downtown." "How much?" I didn't want to say. But she waited. $47. The room erupted in laughter again. Claire rolled her eyes. But Margaret didn't laugh. She stepped closer. "47. I nodded. She gently touched the sleeve. "Who designed this?" "I don't know." Margaret looked at the stitching. Then at the fabric. Then at the way the dress was tailored around my waist. Her expression changed. She turned toward the room. "Who told her this dress was cheap?" Nobody answered. Margaret looked at Claire. "Was it you?" Claire's smile disappeared. "I was joking." Margaret shook her head. "No." Her voice was calm. But suddenly the entire room was listening. "You weren't joking." She pointed toward me. "You were humiliating her." Claire crossed her arms. "Margaret, this is a family thing." Margaret smiled. "Yes." Then she said, "That's exactly why I'm going to say something." Margaret walked toward the dining table. She picked up a napkin. Then she looked at my dress again. Emily, turn around. I hesitated. Why? Please. I turned around. Margaret examined the back of my dress. Then she walked closer. She studied the seams. Her eyes widened. Oh my God. Claire frowned. What? Margaret looked at me. Where did you say you bought this? I repeated the name of the boutique. Margaret turned toward Claire. Your sister didn't buy a cheap dress. Claire laughed. Margaret, it was $47. Margaret nodded. I know. Then she said something that made the entire room silent. Because the designer didn't charge her for it. I stared at her. What? Margaret smiled. This dress was made from a prototype collection. Claire's face changed. Margaret continued. The original version was created for a private fashion show. The designer made only 6. Someone whispered. Who designed it? Margaret looked at me. Then she said. I did. Nobody moved. Claire's mouth fell open. My heart started racing. Margaret was Margaret Hayes, one of the most respected independent fashion designers in America. Her dresses had appeared on red carpets. Her designs had been featured in major fashion magazines. She had dressed actresses, television hosts, and even several members of European royalty. I knew her name. Everyone in that room knew her name. But I had never recognized her because she wasn't dressed like a celebrity. She was dressed like an ordinary woman. Claire stared at her. You designed that? Margaret nodded. Yes. Then she looked at me. I gave 6 prototypes to a boutique owner last year. She touched the sleeve. This was one of them. I couldn't speak. Margaret smiled. You know why I remember it? I shook my head. Because I couldn't sell it. Claire smirked. Exactly. Margaret turned toward her. No. Her voice became firm. I couldn't sell it because it was too simple. She looked around the room. Fashion has become obsessed with showing people how much money they spent. She pointed toward my dress. This dress was designed for women who don't need a logo to feel beautiful. Nobody laughed anymore. Margaret walked toward the table and picked up Claire's designer handbag. She held it beside my dress. Do you know what this bag costs? Claire immediately said. That's not relevant. Margaret nodded. Exactly. She placed the bag down. Price tells you what someone paid. She looked at my dress. Craftsmanship tells you what something is worth. Then she turned to me. Emily, did you alter this dress? I shook my head. No. Did you have it tailored? No. Margaret smiled. That means it fits you naturally. She looked at Claire. Do you know how difficult that is? Claire didn't answer. Margaret continued. Your sister walked into this room wearing something elegant, well-constructed, and timeless. She pointed toward the expensive dresses around the room. And you all laughed because the price wasn't high enough. My mother finally spoke. Margaret, I think you're making this bigger than it is. Margaret looked at her. No. She shook her head. You made it bigger. Mom looked confused. How? Margaret answered. Because your daughter is standing here being humiliated by the people who should have protected her. The room became painfully quiet. Then Margaret said something I'll never forget. The problem isn't that Emily's dress is cheap. She paused. The problem is that your family's kindness is. My mother looked down. Claire's face turned red. Dad put his glass on the table. Then Margaret looked at me. I've seen you before. I frowned. What? At the Community Design Center. I remembered. 3 months earlier, I had volunteered at a non-profit workshop that helped young designers learn about sustainable fashion and interior design. Margaret had been there. I had spoken with her briefly. We had talked about recycled fabrics and affordable design. I had forgotten about it. She hadn't. You were helping young women who couldn't afford expensive materials, she said. I nodded. You stayed 3 hours after the workshop ended because one of the students didn't understand the pattern. I smiled faintly. I remember her. Margaret smiled. She remembers you too. Then Margaret reached into her handbag. She pulled out a small envelope. She handed it to me. What is this? Open it. I did. Inside was a business card. On the back was handwritten. Come work with me. I stared at her. What does this mean? Margaret smiled. It means I'm starting a new collection. She paused. And I want you to help me design it. I looked at her in shock. You barely know me. I know enough. She pointed at my dress. You chose this because you liked how it looked. She pointed around the room. They choose clothes because they want other people to know what they cost. Then she smiled. I know which kind of person I want on my team. Claire suddenly walked toward me. Emily. I didn't answer. She stood in front of me. I didn't know. I looked at her. Didn't know what? That Margaret designed it. I smiled sadly. Would it have mattered? Claire didn't answer. I continued. If Margaret hadn't been here today, would my dress suddenly have become beautiful because you discovered who made it? She looked down. No. Would you still have called me cheap? Silence. No. Would Mom? My mother looked away. Would Dad have told me I didn't belong? Dad sighed. Emily. I held up my hand. No. I wasn't angry anymore. That was the strange part. I had spent years imagining what it would feel like to finally stand up to my family. I thought I'd scream. I thought I'd cry. Instead, I felt calm. Because suddenly I understood something. Their opinion of me had never been the measure of my worth. It had only been their opinion. Nothing more. I left that afternoon. I didn't stay for cake. I didn't stay for presents. I didn't stay for photographs. I went home. I took off my dress. I hung it carefully in my closet. Then I sat on my bed and stared at it. For years, I had believed that my family saw me as less successful because I didn't live the way Claire did. That day, I realized something different. They didn't see me as less successful. They simply didn't know how to recognize success unless it came with a price tag. 2 weeks later, I met Margaret at her studio. She showed me her new collection. And then she asked me to redesign one of the pieces. I spent 6 weeks working on it. It was simple, elegant, affordable, and completely different from the flashy clothes dominating the market. Margaret loved it. She named the piece the Emily dress. I laughed when she told me. That's embarrassing. She smiled. Why? Because it isn't even expensive. Margaret looked at me. That's the point. 6 months later, Margaret's new collection launched. The Emily dress sold out within 48 hours. Then fashion magazines started writing about it. Women loved the idea of owning something beautiful without needing to spend thousands of dollars. The dress became one of the most successful pieces in Margaret's collection. And then something unexpected happened. Claire's wedding was approaching. She had hired an expensive stylist. She had ordered a custom designer wedding gown. The dress cost nearly $30,000. 1 week before the wedding, she called me. I almost didn't answer. But I did. Hello. There was silence. Then Claire said. Emily. Yes? I need your help. I almost laughed. With what? My wedding reception dress. I leaned back in my chair. What happened to your designer? She quit. I raised an eyebrow. Why? She said I was impossible. I smiled. That sounds unfortunate. Emily, please. I heard the desperation in her voice. I need something. I looked toward my closet. The navy blue dress was hanging there. The $47 dress. The dress she had called cheap. The dress my father had said didn't belong at her bridal shower. The dress Margaret had designed. I smiled. I can help. Claire sounded relieved. Really? Yes. What can you make me? I thought for a moment. Something affordable. She went silent. Then she laughed nervously. Okay. I didn't tell her that Margaret and I were about to launch a new collection. I didn't tell her that the dress I was designing for her would be featured in major fashion publications. And I certainly didn't tell her that I wasn't going to charge her a single dollar. Because I had finally learned something. Revenge doesn't always mean hurting someone back. Sometimes revenge is simply becoming everything they said you could never be. Claire wore my design at her wedding reception. The moment she walked into the ballroom, people turned. The dress was elegant. Minimal. Beautiful. It didn't have a giant logo. No excessive diamonds. No flashy decorations. Just perfect tailoring. People asked who made it. Claire looked at me. Then she said, "My sister." I smiled. A fashion editor who had attended the wedding approached me. "Emily, this is incredible." "Thank you. Is this part of your upcoming collection?" I nodded. "Yes." She smiled. "Then you need to be prepared." "For what?" She pointed toward Claire. "Everyone is going to ask about this dress." And they did. Within weeks, my designs were being requested by boutiques across the country. The woman who had once been mocked for wearing a $47 dress was suddenly sitting in meetings where people were discussing six-figure contracts. But the biggest moment came months later. I returned to my parents' house for Thanksgiving. Everyone was there. Claire. Dad. Mom. The same dining room. The same table. The same people. But everything felt different. Mom approached me. "I owe you an apology." I nodded. "Yes, you do." She looked surprised by my answer. "I was cruel." "Yes. I shouldn't have laughed at your dress." "No." She swallowed. "I shouldn't have let your sister make you feel unwanted." I nodded. "You shouldn't have." Then Dad came over. He looked uncomfortable. "Emily." I looked at him. I was wrong. I waited. He sighed. "You did belong there." I smiled. "No, Dad." He looked confused. "What?" "I didn't belong there." He lowered his eyes. I continued. "Not because my dress was cheap." I paused. "Because the way you treated me wasn't something I wanted to belong to anymore." He looked at me for a long time. Then he nodded. "I understand." And for the first time in my life, I believed him. I still have that navy blue dress. I don't wear it very often. I keep it in a garment bag in my studio. Sometimes, when I'm having a difficult day, I take it out. I look at the fabric. I look at the simple lace sleeves. And I remember the woman I was that afternoon. Embarrassed. Humiliated. Trying not to cry. I also remember Margaret standing up. Not because I was famous. Not because I was rich. Not because my dress was secretly expensive. She stood up because she recognized something my family had failed to see. I had value even when nobody was applauding me. That $47 dress eventually became the inspiration for my first major collection. And I named the collection Worth Beyond the Price Tag. The collection became successful. But the greatest thing it gave me wasn't money. It gave me confidence. Because I finally understood that some people will only respect you after someone else tells them you're valuable. But you don't have to wait for that. You can decide your value yourself. My sister once laughed and said, "Cheap girls wear cheap clothes." Years later, she wore my design. And the irony wasn't lost on me. But I never mocked her. I never reminded her of what she had said. Because by then, I didn't need revenge. I had something much better. I had outgrown the people who once made me feel small. And sometimes, that's the most satisfying karma of all.